The rain-slicked streets of Los Angeles shimmered under the streetlights, but Caleb Monroe's heart was a storm no one could see. He stood outside the old Avalon Theater, its marquee barely glowing, the name Vincent Monroe still etched in fading gold. His grandfather's legacy, a Hollywood icon, a heartthrob of the 1950s, felt like a chain around Caleb's neck, pulling tighter with every secret he uncovered. At 24, Caleb was the last of the Monroe line, heir to a fortune built on Vincent's silver screen charisma. The world knew Vincent as the rugged leading man who made women swoon and men wish they could be him. But Caleb knew the truth, a truth buried in yellowed letters he'd found in the attic of the family's Bel Air mansion. Letters from a man named Henry, written in desperate, coded prose, confessing a love Vincent could never claim. Caleb clutched the latest letter in his pocket, its words burning. "I'll wait for you, Vin, even if the world never lets us be." He wasn't supposed to be here tonight. The Avalon was hosting a retrospective of Vincent's films, a glittering event for Hollywood's elite to fawn over a dead star. Caleb had no interest in the nostalgia. But then he'd seen him, Elliot Rivera, the film student who'd been digging into Vincent's life for a documentary. Elliot, with his sharp cheekbones and relentless curiosity, had emailed Caleb weeks ago, asking questions no one else dared. Did Vincent ever talk about his personal life? Were there rumors he kept quiet? Caleb had ignored him, but Elliot's persistence and the way his dark eyes seemed to see right through Caleb had dragged him here. The theater doors swung open, spilling light and laughter onto the wet pavement. Caleb pulled his leather jacket tighter, his breath catching as Elliot stepped out, his navy sweater clinging to his lean frame. Their eyes met, and Caleb felt the same jolt he had when Elliot first cornered him at a coffee shop, demanding answers about Vincent's hidden years. There was something about Elliot, fearless, unguarded, that made Caleb want to spill everything. But the Monroe fortune, the estate, the legacy, it all hinged on silence. "You came," Elliot said, his voice low but warm, cutting through the drizzle. He stepped closer, his sneakers scuffing the pavement. "I wasn't sure you would." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm not here for your documentary." "Then why are you here?" Elliot's gaze was steady, unflinching. He was only a year older than Caleb, but his confidence made him seem untouchable. "You've been dodging me for weeks, Caleb. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be standing in the rain outside your grandfather's tribute." Caleb's fingers brushed the letter in his pocket. He wanted to tell Elliot everything, about the letters, about Vincent's secret love, about the ache of carrying a truth he couldn't share. But the Monroe Estate's trustees, a board of vultures in tailored suits, had made it clear. Any scandal, any hint of Vincent's hidden life, and the fortune would be tied up in legal battles. Caleb's mother, sick and fading in a private hospital, needed that money for her care. He couldn't risk it. "I'm here to tell you to stop," Caleb said, his voice rougher than he meant. "Leave Vincent alone. Leave me alone." Elliot's lips quirked, not quite a smile. "You don't mean that." He took another step, close enough that Caleb could smell his cedarwood cologne. "I've read the archives, Caleb. I've seen the photos, Vincent with that man, Henry, always just out of frame. You know something, don't you?" Caleb's heart pounded. He wanted to shove Elliot away, to run from the truth that felt like it might crack him open. But Elliot's eyes held him, soft and searching, and for a moment, Caleb forgot the rain, the theater, the weight of his grandfather's name. "I can't," Caleb whispered, hating how weak he sounded. "You don't get it, Elliot. This isn't just a story. It's my life." Elliot's hand brushed Caleb's arm, a fleeting touch that sent heat racing through him. "Then let me help you carry it," he said softly. "Whatever it is, you don't have to do this alone." For the first time in years, Caleb felt the edges of his guarded heart crack. He didn't know if it was Elliot's words or the way his touch lingered, but something shifted. The rain fell harder, blurring the world, and Caleb wondered if this was what Vincent had felt with Henry, a pull too strong to fight, no matter the cost. The night stretched on, and Caleb led Elliot to a quiet diner a few blocks away, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Over greasy coffee and flickering fluorescent lights, Caleb began to talk. Not about the letters, not yet, but about growing up in Vincent's shadow, about the pressure to be the perfect heir. Elliot listened, his eyes never leaving Caleb's, and shared his own story. A kid from East LA, raised by a single mom, who fell in love with film because it showed him worlds where he could be himself. "I'm gay," Elliot said simply, no hesitation, no shame. "And I think Vincent was too." Caleb's breath caught. He'd never said it out loud, not to anyone, but the truth had been clawing at him for years. "I think I might be too," he admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. The diner felt too small, the air too thick, but Elliot's smile was a lifeline. "Then we're in this together," Elliot said, reaching across the table to squeeze Caleb's hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a vow. As they left the diner, the rain had stopped, and the city sparkled under a clearing sky. Caleb didn't know what came next, how to balance Vincent's secret, his mother's care, and the growing pull he felt toward Elliot. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. The weight of the Monroe legacy still pressed down, but with Elliot beside him, it felt just a little lighter. The next morning, Caleb woke to the hum of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. Elliot's name flashed on the screen, and his chest tightened with a mix of dread and anticipation. Last night's confession in the diner had left him raw, like he'd peeled back his skin and let Elliot see the mess underneath. "Meet me at the library," Elliot's text read. "Found something you need to see." Caleb dragged himself out of bed, the Bel Air mansion's silence pressing against him. His mother's empty room down the hall was a constant reminder of the stakes. The trustees had been clear. The Monroe fortune funded her treatment, but any scandal could jeopardize it. Caleb had spent years perfecting the role of the dutiful heir, polished, distant, untouchable. But Elliot was unraveling that facade, and Caleb wasn't sure he wanted to stop him. The Los Angeles Central Library was a maze of marble and books, its air thick with dust and history. Elliot was waiting in the rare books section, his laptop open to a scanned article from a 1950s gossip rag. "Look at this," he said, sliding the screen toward Caleb. The headline screamed, "Vincent Monroe's Mystery Man. Who is he?" Below it was a grainy photo of Vincent, young and radiant, laughing with a man whose face was half hidden. "Henry." Caleb's throat tightened. "Where did you find this?" "Buried in an archive nobody checks," Elliot said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "The studio buried it, Caleb. They paid off the press to keep Vincent's image clean. But this proves Henry existed. They were close, closer than the world was allowed to know." Caleb stared at the photo, Vincent's smile so unguarded it hurt to see. He'd spent his life idolizing his grandfather, but this version of Vincent, vulnerable, in love, felt real in a way the movie star never had. "What do you want to do with this?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elliot leaned closer, his eyes fierce. "I want to tell their story. Not just Vincent's, but Henry's too. They deserve that. And you," he hesitated, his voice softening, "you deserve to stop hiding." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "You don't get it, Elliot. If this gets out, the trustees will gut the estate. My mom's care, her treatment, it's all tied to that money. I can't just throw it away for a story." Elliot's jaw tightened, but his gaze didn't waver. "I'm not asking you to throw anything away. I'm asking you to trust me. We can do this carefully, find a way to honor Vincent and Henry without losing what you need." Caleb wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury he'd never afforded himself. Growing up under the Monroe, name meant walls, not bridges. Yet Elliot's sincerity, the way he leaned forward like Caleb's fears mattered, chipped away at those walls. They spent hours in the library, poring over more articles, letters, and studio memos Elliot had unearthed. Each piece was a fragment of Vincent's hidden life. A canceled film project, a sudden trip to Paris, a cryptic note about protecting the star. Caleb felt like he was meeting his grandfather for the first time. Not the myth, but the man. As the afternoon faded, Elliot suggested they grab food at a taco truck near MacArthur Park. The air was warm, the park alive with music and families. Over Al Pastor tacos, Elliot opened up about his own life. Coming out to his mom at 16, the struggle to afford film school, the drive to tell stories that mattered. I want to make films that show people like us, he said, his eyes bright. People who love, who fight, who exist even when the world tells them to hide. Caleb's heart ached at the words. He'd never let himself imagine a life where he could be open, where he could love without fear. But sitting across from Elliot, watching the way his hands moved when he talked, Caleb felt a spark of possibility. I found another letter, Caleb admitted, pulling the crumpled paper from his jacket. He hadn't planned to share it, but the words spilled out. It's from Henry. He wrote it the day Vincent married my grandmother. He said he understood why Vincent did it, but it broke him. Elliot's hand rested on Caleb's, steady and warm. Can I read it? Caleb hesitated, then slid the letter across the table. As Elliot's eyes scanned the faded ink, Caleb felt exposed, like he was handing over a piece of himself. When Elliot looked up, his expression was soft, almost reverent. This is love, Caleb. Real, messy, painful love. We have to tell this story for them, and for you. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the park in shades of orange and purple. Caleb didn't have an answer, not yet. But as they walked back to Elliot's beat-up sedan, their shoulders brushing, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet courage, fragile but growing. Caleb's phone buzzed as he stepped into the Bel Air mansion, the chandelier casting cold light across the marble foyer. It was a voicemail from Margaret, the head trustee, her voice clipped and icy. We've heard you've been talking to a filmmaker, Caleb. Be careful. The Monroe legacy is fragile. He deleted it, his pulse racing, but her words clung to him like damp air. Elliot had texted, too. Meet me at the Griffith Observatory tonight. I have an idea. Caleb's first instinct was to say no, to retreat to the safety of silence. But the memory of Elliot's hand on his, the warmth of their talk at the park, pulled him out the door. The observatory perched above the city, its dome glowing under a star-streaked sky. Elliot was waiting on the terrace, his silhouette sharp against the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles. I thought we could use some perspective, he said, grinning as Caleb approached. The stars don't care about secrets. Caleb managed a small smile, but his nerves were frayed. Margaret called. The trustees know about you. They're watching. Elliot's grin faded, replaced by a fierce determination. Then we move faster. I've been thinking, we don't need to expose Vincent's whole story right away. We can start small, release a teaser for the documentary, test the waters. If the trustees push back, we'll have leverage, public interest. Caleb's stomach twisted. Leverage? This isn't a game, Elliot. If they cut off the estate, my mom, he stopped, his voice cracking. She's all I have left. Elliot's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could see the flecks of gold in his irises. I know, and I promise, I'm not trying to hurt you or her. But hiding Vincent's truth, it's hurting you too. I see it, Caleb. You're carrying this alone, and it's too heavy. For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. Elliot's words cut too close, exposing the loneliness he'd buried under duty. He turned away, gripping the terrace railing, the city lights blurring below. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be me. Elliot's hand found his shoulder, a steady anchor. You don't have to know yet. Just take one step. Let me help you. They stood there, the night wrapping around them, and Caleb felt the pull again, that dangerous, exhilarating feeling that made him want to lean into Elliot and never pull back. He turned, their faces inches apart, and for a heartbeat, he thought he might kiss him. But fear won, and he stepped back, shoving his hands in his pockets. Show me your idea, he said, his voice rough. Elliot nodded, unfazed, and led him to a quiet corner with a laptop. He pulled up a rough cut of the documentary teaser, grainy footage of Vincent's films, clips of his dazzling smile, intercut with cryptic lines from Henry's letters. The final frame was a still of Vincent and Henry, their hands almost touching, with the words, "Some stories were never meant to stay hidden." Caleb's chest ached. It was beautiful, haunting, and dangerous. "If we release this, there's no going back," he said. "I know," Elliot replied. "But it's not just about Vincent. It's about you too. About us." The word us hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Caleb didn't know what us meant, not yet, but it sparked something in him, a reckless hope he hadn't felt in years. They spent the rest of the night refining the teaser, debating every frame, every word. Elliot's passion was infectious, and Caleb found himself laughing, arguing, feeling alive in a way he hadn't since before his mother got sick. As they left the observatory, the city sprawling beneath them, Elliot reached for Caleb's hand. This time, Caleb didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, tentative but sure, and for the first time, Caleb let himself imagine a world where he didn't have to hide. But back at the mansion, reality crashed in. Another voicemail from Margaret awaited, sharper this time. "We've scheduled a meeting with the board. Be there, Caleb. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The weight of the Monroe legacy settled back onto his shoulders, heavier than ever. He looked at Elliot's text, "We're close. Don't give up," and wondered if courage was enough to carry them through. The boardroom was a cold, sterile cage, all glass and steel, perched high above downtown Los Angeles. Caleb sat at the end of the mahogany table, facing the trustees, 5 men and women in crisp suits, their faces carved from stone. Margaret, the head trustee, leaned forward, her silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. "We've heard disturbing rumors, Caleb," she said, her voice slicing through the silence. "A documentary, a filmmaker, questions about Vincent's personal life." Caleb's hands gripped the arms of his chair, the leather creaking under his fingers. He'd known this meeting was coming, but the reality of it, their cold stares, the unspoken threat, made his stomach churn. "It's just a student project," he lied, keeping his voice steady. "Nothing to worry about." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We've protected the Monroe legacy for decades. Your grandfather's image is untouchable. If you're involved in anything that jeopardizes that, the estate's funds, your mother's care, could be reevaluated." The threat landed like a punch. Caleb's mother, wasting away in her hospital bed, was the only reason he'd kept Vincent's secret for so long. He nodded, jaw tight, and promised to handle it. But as he left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a new text from Elliot, teasers ready to drop. "You in?" Caleb's heart raced. He wanted to say yes, to stand with Elliot and tell the world about Vincent and Henry. But the trustee's words echoed, chaining him to silence. He drove to Elliot's tiny apartment in East L.A., the city a blur of lights and noise. Elliot opened the door, his face lighting up, but it dimmed when he saw Caleb's expression. "They threatened my mom's care," Caleb said, stepping inside. The apartment was cluttered with film equipment and books, a stark contrast to the mansion's sterile opulence. "If we release the teaser, they'll cut me off." Elliot sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, we'll find another way. Maybe we hold off, gather more evidence, make it undeniable before we go public." Caleb shook his head, frustration boiling over. "There's no undeniable with them. They'll bury anything we find, just like they buried Vincent's life. I can't keep doing this, lying, hiding, pretending I'm someone I'm not." Elliot stood, closing the distance between them. "Then don't," he said fiercely. "Caleb, you're not just Vincent's grandson. You're you, and you're allowed to want things, truth, love, a life that's yours." The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He'd spent so long being the Monroe heir, he'd forgotten what it felt like to want something for himself. Elliot's hand cupped his cheek, and this time Caleb didn't pull away. Their lips met, tentative at first, then desperate, a collision of fear and longing. It was messy, imperfect, and everything Caleb had been afraid to feel. When they pulled apart, breathless, Elliot's eyes were bright with determination. "We'll figure this out together," he said. but you need to decide what you're fighting for. The next day, Caleb visited his mother in the hospital. Her frail hand squeezed his, her eyes clouded but warm. "You look different," she murmured. "Happier." Caleb's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her about Elliot, about Vincent, about the battle raging inside him. Instead, he kissed her forehead and promised to keep her safe. But as he left, he knew safety wasn't enough. Not for her, not for him. He met Elliot at a quiet beach in Malibu, the waves crashing under a gray sky. They walked along the shore, and Caleb finally handed over the last of Henry's letters. "This one's different," he said. "It's from after Vincent's death. Henry wrote it to my grandmother, begging her to tell the truth." Elliot read it, his face softening with every line. "He loved Vincent until the end," he said. "We have to do this, Caleb. For them." Caleb nodded, the ocean's roar drowning out his fear. "Okay, let's release the teaser. But we do it smart, small platforms, no big splash. We control the story." Elliot's smile was brighter than the sun breaking through the clouds. They sat on the sand, plotting their next move, their hands brushing in the space between them. For the first time, Caleb felt like he was choosing his own path, even if it was paved with risk. The teaser dropped on a small indie film blog at midnight, a quiet ripple in the vast ocean of the internet. Caleb watched the views tick up, his heart pounding with every new comment. Who was Henry? Is this real? Vincent Monroe was gay. The question spread faster than he'd expected, and by morning, the teaser had been shared across social media, sparking debates and theories. Elliot called, his voice electric with excitement. "It's working, Caleb. People are talking. We're shaking things up." But Caleb couldn't shake the dread pooling in his gut. He'd agreed to the release, but the trustees' threat loomed large. He drove to the hospital, needing to see his mother, to remind himself why he'd hesitated so long. She was awake, her eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. "I saw the news," she said softly. "About your grandfather." Caleb froze. "You knew." She nodded, her smile fragile. "I found the letters years ago. I wanted to protect you, Caleb, but maybe it's time to let him be free." Her words broke something in him, a dam he'd built to hold back the truth. He hugged her, tears burning his eyes, and promised to make things right. But when he checked his phone, a new message from Margaret waited. "Board meeting. Tomorrow. Be prepared." The meeting was a battlefield. Margaret and the trustees sat like judges, their expressions unyielding. "You've endangered the estate," Margaret said, slamming a printout of the teaser's comments on the table. "This stops now or we freeze the funds." Caleb's voice shook, but he stood his ground. Vincent was more than your myth. He was a man who loved someone he couldn't have. "I'm done hiding that." The room went silent. Then, to his shock, one trustee, an older man named Harold, spoke up. "I knew Vincent. He was my friend. If this is true, maybe it's time we let him rest." The concession was small, but it was a crack in the wall. Caleb left the meeting shaken but resolute. He met Elliot at a coffee shop, the air between them charged with possibility. "They're scared," Caleb said, sliding into the booth. "But one of them's on our side. We might have a chance." Elliot's grin was infectious. "Then we keep going. I've got contacts at a bigger platform. They want the full documentary. We can do this, Caleb." They spent the afternoon planning, their voices overlapping with ideas and hope. But as evening fell, Elliot's phone buzzed with a message that made his face go pale. "It's my mom," he said. "She's in a hospital. Heart trouble." Caleb drove him to East L.A., the city lights blurring past. At the hospital, Elliot's mother, Maria, was stable but weak. She gripped Caleb's hand, her eyes warm. "You're the one he's been talking about," she said, her voice raspy. "Take care of my boy." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. He stayed with Elliot through the night, their hands clasped in the dim waiting room. It was a moment of quiet amidst the storm, a reminder of what they were fighting for, not just Vincent and Henry, but their own chance at love. By morning, Maria was stable, and Elliot's relief was palpable. They stepped outside, the dawn painting the sky in soft pinks. "I'm scared," Elliot admitted, his voice barely audible. But I'm not stopping. Not for Vincent. Not for us. Caleb pulled him close, their foreheads touching. Neither am I, he said. And in that moment, under the breaking light, he knew he'd fight for this. For Elliot, for Vincent, for himself, no matter the cost. The documentary's first rough cut was raw, unpolished, but it burned with truth. Caleb and Elliot screened it in Elliot's apartment, the laptop screen casting shadows on the walls. Clips of Vincent's films wove together with Henry's letters, narrated by Elliot's steady voice. The final frame, a photo of Vincent and Henry, their eyes locked in unspoken devotion, left Caleb breathless. "It's good," he said, his voice thick. "It's really good." Elliot's smile was tired but proud. "We're almost there. But we need more. Something undeniable. The trustees will fight this." Caleb knew he was right. The board had been quiet since the meeting, but their silence felt like the calm before a storm. He spent the next week digging through the mansion's attic, unearthing more of Vincent's life. A journal, a locket with Henry's initials, a faded script with notes in Vincent's handwriting. Each piece was a thread, weaving a story the world deserved to hear. But the trustees weren't idle. Margaret called, her voice dripping with venom. "We've hired investigators, Caleb. If you push this, we'll find dirt on your filmmaker friend. Everyone has skeletons." Caleb's blood ran cold. He thought of Elliot, his passion, his vulnerability, his mother's hospital bills. He couldn't let them hurt him. But when he told Elliot, expecting fear, Elliot just laughed. "Let them dig. I've got nothing to hide." His courage was a spark, reigniting Caleb's resolve. They decided to premiere the documentary at a small film festival in Silver Lake, a safe space for indie voices. The night of the screening, the theater was packed, the air humming with anticipation. Caleb stood at the back, his heart pounding, as Elliot took the stage to introduce the film. "This is for everyone who's had to hide who they are," Elliot said, his voice steady. "For Vincent, for Henry, and for us." The lights dimmed, and the film began. Caleb watched the audience, their faces rapt, some tear-streaked. When the credits rolled, the applause was deafening. Strangers hugged Caleb, thanking him for telling Vincent's story. For the first time, he felt proud, not of a Monroe name, but of himself. But the victory was short-lived. As they left the theater, Margaret was waiting, her face a mask of fury. "You've made a mistake, Caleb," she said. "The board's voting tomorrow to freeze the estate. You've lost everything." Caleb's knees buckled, but Elliot's hands steadied him. "You don't get to decide his worth," Elliot snapped at her. "He's more than your money." They drove to the beach, needing air, needing space. The waves crashed, dark and endless, and Caleb finally let himself cry. Not for the money, but for the years he'd spent hiding. Elliot held him, his arms a safe harbor, and whispered, "We'll figure it out. Together." The next morning, Caleb visited his mother. She was weaker, but her eyes were bright. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Vincent would be too." Her words carried him through the day, through the board's vote to freeze the estate. But Harold, the trustee who'd known Vincent, pulled Caleb aside. "I'm working on the others," he said. "Give me time." Caleb nodded, hope flickering. He met Elliot at the diner where it all began, their hands entwined across the table. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Caleb felt free. The weeks after the festival were a whirlwind. The documentary went viral, shared by bloggers, activists, and film buffs. Vincent Monroe's name trended, not as a myth, but as a man who loved fiercely, who hid to survive. Caleb and Elliot were inundated with messages, support, anger, curiosity. But the trustee's silence was deafening, a sword hanging over Caleb's head. He and Elliot moved forward, editing the documentary for a wider release. They worked late nights in Elliot's apartment, fueled by coffee and quiet moments of connection, a brush of hands, a shared laugh. Caleb was falling, hard, and it scared him as much as it thrilled him. He'd never let himself love before, not like this. One evening, as they reviewed footage, Elliot paused the laptop. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "I got an offer. A big studio wants to fund the documentary's distribution. But they want control, Caleb. They want to soften Vincent's story, make it palatable." Caleb's stomach dropped. "No, we didn't come this far to let them rewrite him." Elliot nodded, his eyes fierce. "Exactly. I told them no, but it means we're on our own, crowdfunding small platforms. It's riskier." Caleb reached for his hand. "I'm in. For Vincent, for Henry, for us." The next day, Harold called. "The board split," he said. "Some want to bury this, but others, they're listening. The public's on your side, Caleb. Keep pushing." It was a lifeline, fragile but real. Caleb and Elliot launched a crowdfunding campaign, pouring their hearts into a plea for support. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, along with stories from strangers who'd hidden their own truths. Caleb read each one, tears in his eyes, feeling less alone with every word. The documentary's premiere was set for a historic theater in Hollywood, a fitting tribute to Vincent. The night was electric, the audience a mix of fans, activists, and curious locals. Caleb stood beside Elliot on the red carpet, their hands clasped, no longer hiding. When the film ended, the standing ovation shook the walls, and Caleb felt Vincent's spirit in the room, free at last. Afterward, at a quiet after-party, Harold approached. "The board's releasing the funds," he said. "Your mother's care is secure, and we're setting up a foundation in Vincent's name for stories like his." Caleb's knees nearly gave out. He hugged Harold, then turned to Elliot, who was grinning through tears. They stepped outside, the night air cool against their skin. Under the stars, Caleb kissed Elliot, slow and sure, no fear left in him. "I love you," Caleb said, the words new but true. Elliot's smile was brighter than the Hollywood sign. "I love you too." They stood together, the city alive around them, and Caleb knew this was the ending Vincent and Henry never had, a love that didn't have to hide, a legacy that didn't need to break them. The Monroe fortune was safe, but more importantly, Caleb was free. He'd found his truth, and it was worth every fight.